Hi there, how's it going? Hope you are well. Now, it's been a pretty quiet time in terms of tech news. I mean, there's still big fights around the tech giants, but it feels like the whole world is looking at what's going on in the US with the US presidential election and indeed COVID. At the time of recording this, Trump was diagnosed with COVID. I think he's checked himself out. Let's just not go into it. It's all very complicated and probably changed. Something else will have happened by the time I upload this video. So instead, I want to talk about something that people have been talking to me about for quite some time. Something that people said, oh, can you do a video on this? It's really interesting. And something that I kind of first spoke about at a conference that we did nearly 2 years ago, in fact, where I talked about something called the data dilemma, which is about how where you are using, collecting or giving away data, what do you get in return? Is it worth what you're giving up data for? Is collecting and using data really worth what you're getting back? So quite an interesting topic. Now, lots of people said, have you seen The Social Dilemma? It's a show on Netflix. It is really good. It's a documentary essentially about how social media, the collection of data on social media manipulates us, how it essentially gets us to almost become, it's almost like a Pavlov's dog reaction, that you start to become a bit addicted, you're encouraged to sort of get more involved in social media, give up more data, spend more time on it. There's also that thing, if anyone's got a phone, I'm sure you've done something, particularly during the sort of COVID-19 epidemic, fun games and things that we've had to deal with, of doom scrolling, where you constantly keep scrolling down your phone. You're looking at all times to see what's new and what's happened and what's important. So I want to talk a bit about not just the Social Dilemma itself, which I do recommend you watch. In fact, if you haven't seen it, maybe pause this video. It is quite long. Go watch it now. Well done. And see if it's actually impacted on what people think. Because social media, I will stress, and the rise of the use of social media, the fact that all our data becomes a commodity, there are lots of good aspects about it. You can do things you could never do before in terms of marketing. You can contact people around the world a lot more easily than you could before. It's probably reunited lots of people. I'm sure there have been romances, families, whatever have survived thanks to the use of social media. All well and good. But you can't deny that when you get something for free, is it really free? Now, I've said this before, it's not. If you are being offered a service for free, quite often if you're being offered a service, you're paying for it and it's taking your data in some way, chances are that data is being monetized in some way and you are part of the product that the company is selling. It may be selling that product to you, it may be selling other people's products to you, but you become essentially a product. I'm not saying that you become a slave, although some people who are very wary of social media may say that, but you essentially become something, you're giving away something in return to get something back in return. Normally, you'd buy something with money. You'd give someone, I don't know, a $10, $100 bill, you get something back. Here, you give away some personal information. You might give away some photographs of yourself. You may give away your reaction to certain things you see on the internet, which is very valuable from a marketing perspective in return for being able to use that service. And as a result, and again, this is not rocket science, nobody should be surprised by this, social media platforms or any platform that's using any sort of social media based, I mean data based, let's not even call it social media, algorithms will be building up profiles and thinking of a way that it can essentially sell those profiles and that information. It's very valuable to people who are marketing. You must have had this thing, I'm sure everyone will who uses a social media platform, let's use Facebook as an example, it's by no means the only one, where you're having a conversation with someone and you suddenly realize you're being recommended something associated with that conversation and you become paranoid, incredibly paranoid, as to whether that your phone has been listening to you and Facebook's listening to you. Or if you've been talking about a person and suddenly you get recommended that person as a friend if they're not a friend. Or, and LinkedIn is renowned for this, you meet someone randomly in an event and then you're suddenly recommended them as a connection, perhaps because they've looked you up, most likely is why that has happened. So all of this sort of things, it's not new. The question is, are people okay with it? Now, I would bet that most of the people, if not all of the people who've said to me, oh my God, I watched Social Dilemma, I am so scared that we're being exploited and manipulated and used, are still using all of those platforms because they have become ubiquitous. Now, you cannot really survive very well, certainly if you're trying to build a profile, if you're trying to do something in the public space, without using things like Facebook, like Twitter, like Instagram. You could argue, I mean, it's topical now, like something like TikTok even, and people make fortunes out of it. Much more than I would ever make as a lawyer could be made by doing funny videos on TikTok, which is both incredible and for me somewhat depressing, but there we are. But it's hard to survive. And I've even had people in the professional space, and this is a big deal, saying, okay, I could give up the likes of Facebook, I could give up Instagram, but LinkedIn has become such an important tool now that I can't survive without that. And that essentially is using the same mechanisms as social media to build your career. Look at some of you must have people who post things, you say, why are they posting this? They're building up a reputation. It's all a marketing tool. Now this all comes down, in my view, purely in my view, I'm sure other people will agree, to something called gamification. So if you think about the human brain, think about how we are wired. I have to stress there's no law in this whatsoever. I'll maybe throw some at the end. Think how we're wired. We respond, you can tell I did a psychology thing years and years ago. We are wired to respond to rewards. It's like Pavlov's dog. So that may be a good feeling in yourself. So if you do something good or you get something back or you buy something new, you get an intrinsic reward. You suddenly get this warm glow inside. Social media, the use of collection of data, it is all based on this reward system. It used to be as something as basic as if you get more likes, you feel better about yourself. That was on Facebook. It's now if you get more followers, you feel better about yourself. If more people agree with you, you feel better about yourself. Therefore, you find these echo chambers within social media platforms where everyone's agreeing with each other. If you get more views on LinkedIn, you're probably watching this video on LinkedIn, and the more views I get of it, the more I think, oh, brilliant, that's great. This all is wired in to reward you and make you think that you're somehow the best, you're being successful, you're achieving something, you're getting something back, essentially you feel, for nothing because you're not paying for the service. And this is wired in so many ways, and the data you're provided is used to essentially build a record of you that manipulates you to an extent in so many ways into essentially consuming more of the social media, that you have to ask yourself whether you're okay with it. And I'd say most people say, maybe not. I mean, as long as you know what you're doing, it's a bit like drugs, isn't it? As long as you know what you're doing, you might be okay. But generally, you will find out you're not okay. You probably end up getting addicted. But if you're okay with using it, make sure you use it cleverly. But that's not the case because this thing is being marketed to everybody, and certainly vulnerable groups can get into trouble. So, if you've watched these videos before, I play video games. Because I don't have as much time as I used to, certainly, and I'm getting a bit old, I don't play many video games as I would like, and I certainly don't play them online. I'm massively enjoying Star Wars Squadrons, which is basically flying X-Wings and TIE fighters because I can live out all of my Star Wars fantasies. But we saw the release, I think last week, of a new football game, FIFA. I don't follow them. It's a game by Electronic Arts. They're not the only ones who are doing what I'm about to talk about. And it's called FIFA, I presume, FIFA 2021. It's a football game, and I'm sure it's great. I'm not a football fan. But you can build something called the Ultimate Team by essentially winning players by spending in-game points. And you get these points by opening loot boxes. This is like a mystery box, and you'll open it, you pay for it with your points, you open it, you may get a brilliant player. You can say, I don't know much about football, like, I know, Bobby Charlton or Roy of the Rovers, or you might get someone rubbish like Bobby Boots, who plays for Accrington Stanley. But the problem is you don't know what you're going to get. You're essentially gambling because you're saying, I want box number 2, or I want this box, I don't know what's inside. And yeah, you can use points you've earned in-game, but you can also pay money for them. But it creates this reward mechanism, this way that you're giving something up in return for something you don't really know exactly what it is you're going to get back, but you're hoping it will be something that will make your experience in the game better. It's a reward. This is a problem because it's marketed to kids. Kids magazine, I think a Toy Shop magazine, recently withdrew an ad for this whole system because they realised there might be some issue. And there is an issue in the UK as to whether it constitutes gambling. But this gamification, you see it everywhere. If you think about if you're playing anything like Candy Crush, like if you run out of, I think it's gems, I don't play Candy Crush by the way, you can pay money to carry on playing, and you want to carry on playing because people seem to be horribly addicted to Candy Crush even now. But it's not necessarily wrong, it's just a way of marketing that's manipulating you. Now social media does the same. The data they collect on you means that there's a profile of you that makes you slightly easier to market to. Some would argue makes you slightly easier to be manipulated. Now when I was talking about the data dilemma a couple of years ago, I use the example of if you're a user of Spotify, which is collecting data about what you listen to. It will make recommendations to you about what you listen to. Netflix will do the same. If you've watched a series of certain things, it will recommend things it thinks fits within this profile of you. Now, I would go so far as to say that both Netflix, Spotify, and anything where there's media can probably tell what your mood is. If you're listening to, I know, let's suppose that you suddenly start listening to a bit of Radiohead, Adele's Someone Like You, and heaven forbid, a song that someone went to jail for playing too many times, Dolly Parton's I Will Always Love You. Safe to assume you're a bit miserable because you've possibly been dumped. And you could probably sell someone products based on that. I presume ice cream we would have when you get dumped, or maybe some new clothes to go and find someone new after you have been dumped. But you can market to people based on that. This manipulation is everywhere. Now, I would be interested, and please comment or message me. Have you given up any platform as a result of this? You know it's happening. It's not just when people watch The Social Dilemma that they thought, oh my God, I'm being played. I am basically being used as a marketing tool by a corporation. You surely knew that before. You must have known that before. I mean, if you're watching this video, you're interested in technology and law, you probably knew before. And I assume people are okay with it. The issue is, I mean, I'm okay with it. You kind of know what you're being sold. You know what data you're giving up. The issue is when people don't, like the kids example I mentioned earlier, where kids essentially buying loot boxes, running up their parents' credit cards. But when it becomes something that you cannot essentially live without, well, you live without it, but actually maybe you wouldn't live without it. If I use the LinkedIn example, if you can only get a job if you've got a good LinkedIn profile, maybe you can't live without it. And then suddenly your data stops being yours. You're essentially, in order to find work, market yourselves, build your career, try and do something that isn't just, I suppose, sit at home and sit in a box with a tinfoil hat on, you're essentially giving away your data. And are you okay with that? Now, I'm not. I don't like the idea that there is profiles relating to, I used to go through on Facebook, and I only use it really to self-market anymore, so it doesn't really have a great profile of me. But you can look at the settings and see what it thinks you're interested in. And I regularly delete all of those. I'd be like, come on, I don't want you monitoring my interests. But I've given up because as quickly as I can delete them, they will rebuild the profile for me. You check your privacy settings, but it's still building out a profile. It's still selling stuff about you. And every platform is doing the same things. So this isn't Trump saying TikTok sending your personal data to China. This is about a corporation collecting information from you that it uses to make money. And are you okay with that? I'm only okay with it to the extent that I can control it. And I feel like now maybe it's gone out of control. Now, will this change? I don't think so. There is a move to regulate some of the social media and online giants. It's happening in the US. They're saying you've got far too much power. I would go so far as to say, and I love sci-fi, I'm a big fan of William Gibson, I would say, and indeed Judge Dredd, they probably go together, but I would say that we have reached this position now where you have mega corporations who are richer and more powerful than some of the biggest governments in the world. In a sci-fi sort of dystopian setting where I could be a cyberpunk, that's kind of cool, but in the grand scheme of things, it is a little bit scary. And then you question whether these companies should be reined in, but then you interfere with the free market. Go the other way, have a look at what's going in China, where most of the companies are going to be beholden to the state anyway. They're required to supply information to the government. And then you have another issue. You could argue that in plenty of jurisdictions, not just China, these companies will then be provided to surrender your data to the government as well. And they'll say, oh, Paul Haswell is really into video games, records, and sci-fi. He's clearly a nerd. That's probably what they come up with. He's clearly a nerd. But this is something that I don't know. Will it be stopped? Will there ever be laws to rein it in? I'm not sure. Now, the nearest we've got, this is the boring bit, is the GDPR, which controls personal data. But it relies on consent to a certain extent. If you consent to provide your data on something for a use that's been specified to you, you've given your consent. And I would say that nobody really checks the terms and conditions of anything they sign up to. Or indeed, most companies will skirt around the data privacy law or ignore the GDPR anyway, so they won't really care. So I don't think we can do anything. What I do think we need, and what, again, this isn't really legal, is we probably need more education as to how this whole social media platform was. If people were horrified from watching The Social Dilemma, if they thought, oh my God, this is terrible, we should actually go to the point where we are teaching people in schools how these platforms work, how essentially you are surrendering something in return for getting something back. We may find that everyone says, that's fine, this is how we live from now on, it doesn't matter. I mean, I'm a generation who was pre-internet, watched the internet blow up, and now is with the internet today. I've kind of seen a picture go all the way through, probably almost unique in that sense, and use it a lot. But people may be okay with it. It may be the new normal, which I hate is a phrase I hate. So I don't know. Interested in your views. This has been a bit of a ramble because I don't really have a view other than thinking I'm okay with my data being used provided I can control how it's used, but at the same time admitting that actually I can't control it. Anything I put online, any service I use is probably using data in ways that I cannot possibly imagine. But I don't really have a solution other than awareness. So be aware of what you're doing. Re-watch The Social Dilemma, and yeah, maybe I'll do a follow-up on this. Last thing before I go, we are planning a technology conference where myself and others will be speaking about various topics. I will be talking about the tech war. It's been a theme for sort of this part of the year anyway. It doesn't seem to be going away. There'll be other speakers talk about things like China's new cryptocurrency, the state-run one, which is quite exciting. We'll have some chats about 5G. It normally would be here in Hong Kong in an office, but that's not going to happen because everyone's scared about COVID. So it will be online. So I'll disseminate an invite where you can sort of click and get the link to watch the videos. I think there's going to be 2 days. It'll be live and you can interact, and that'll be very exciting too. And maybe you can ask me some questions about The Social Dilemma and what we should be doing in terms of whether we are okay with essentially being the product of a large corporation. Scary stuff. Maybe not so scary. Read some William Gibson, read some dystopian cyberpunk and see what you think. Maybe we're on our way there. Anyway, until next time, have a great day. See you all very, very soon.